Do you believe in the promise proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence? Do you believe that all of us are created equal and that we have a natural right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And do you also believe that we should guarantee those rights to all Americans? Of course you do. So let's think about what that means. On January 11, 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, delivered his 11th State of the Union message to Congress. The United States was in the middle of its biggest and most consequential war, pitted against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. But Roosevelt didn't just talk about winning the war. He also spoke of what Americans needed to do to win the peace to come. In a speech to Congress that day, he called for a new Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights. This republic, he said, had its beginning and grew to its present strength under the protection of certain inalienable rights. They were our rights to life and liberty. As our nation has grown in size and stature, however, as our industrial economy expanded, these political rights proved inadequate to assure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. The words that followed are among the most radical in presidential history. We have come, FDR contended, to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. What he then proposed would be seen as far left today, though as he reminded his fellow Americans, it was not a repudiation of the promises enshrined in the Declaration and the Bill of Rights, but a continuation and realization of them. Indeed, only with economic rights could political rights be made real. As Roosevelt said,
"In our day, certain economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed."
The rights Roosevelt was proposing, a right to a home, to health care, to earn enough money.
I want to jump in there and introduce Professor Harvey, Kaye, to the conversation, along with our brother Alan Minsky, and we are here with Dr. Carl Mack. I want to jump into this because I need to tie a couple of threads together. First, we said something behind the scene about how all this connects together to the international stage, and I want to make a little pin here, if I could. Professor Kaye, could you first talk about the economic freedom of Black people and why it's necessary for us to have that economic freedom for us to get our liberation? Because while I looked at that video and I see FDR, and you and I have talked about him extensively, Black people were left out of the equation in a very significant way. So that we don't belabor that problem too long, can you just sum up that economic freedom for Black people and reparations?
Okay, well, let's start out from the fact that the New Deal, as FDR had envisioned it, was to be universal for all Americans. But of course, Southern Democrats, who were, segregationists and white supremacists, they found a way into the legislation that would literally leave out agricultural workers and household workers from the two key elements that we think of in terms of the New Deal, Social Security and the National Labor Relations Act. But when he spoke in 1944 and called for an economic Bill of Rights, he was well aware of the imperative of making it clear that he envisioned an economic Bill of Rights for all Americans. And I would add that October, this was in January, that October when he reiterated his call for the economic Bill of Rights on the campaign trail, he also, for the first time ever, actually called for an end to voting, an end to the exclusion of certain peoples from voting. He called for the right to vote for all Americans. Now, it is the case that the New Deal was intended for all. It was not. What is, to me, interesting is the degree to which figures, first of all, like A. Philip Randolph, recognized the power of those words. And in the 1960s, he came back, that's Randolph, and proposed a freedom budget in 1965 that would have addressed all of the concerns of poverty for both African Americans and white Americans, both urban and rural, and indeed it garnered the support of 150 plus civil rights leaders, labor leaders, foundation heads, academics. And the tragedy at that moment was that Lyndon Johnson, who was eager to celebrate Randolph's vision and FDR's vision, allowed his commitment to the war in Vietnam to override the creation of racial justice and equality in America. And then I want to point out, however,
let me hold you right there, because I think that's an important part as we talk about the build up to Ukraine, and I don't mean to phrase it like that, but I think it's very clear that all the money that is going to war, that would potentially go to war, is money that's immediately taken out of our politics domestically, and Black people in this country being at the bottom of the totem economically in some key indicators. Programs are going to be devastated. I want to bring in Alan Minsky into the conversation really briefly. He's the executive director for Progressive Democrats of America, and we're discussing a call for all progressive candidates and office holders to embrace a 21st century economic Bill of Rights. I want to talk about that left flank of the economic conversation and the intersection of race and class. Can you talk about that in context of your article and everything you're working on?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to absolutely concur with you about military expenditures and our proposal. If you do look at most other technological industrialized societies in the world, they basically have fulfilled the tenets of this economic Bill of Rights that the United States of America has failed to do so. One thing conspicuously absent from all those other countries, from East Asia, Europe, wherever in the world you have prosperous technological industrial societies, they don't have massive military budgets like the United States. Now, as per the question of the economic Bill of Rights, the Rooseveltian legacy, and structural racism and economic racism in the United States, the work that we built off of Professor Kaye and I in actually deciding upon which 8 measures we would include, we built off of largely 2 previous works on a 21st century economic Bill of Rights. The very basic template that Senator Bernie Sanders put forward as he put forward 6 Bill of Rights, and the work of Professor William Darity, Derek Hamilton, and Mark Paul in their article from 2018, where they proposed 9. And from Bernie's template of 6, we actually sort of have more phrases in ours, so we probably really have about 10 or 11 in there. But 2 of them that were added in from the work of Professor Darity, Hamilton, and Paul were the right to sound banking and financial services. But I think most importantly, and of course, Professor Darity is himself one of the leading advocates among contemporary economists for a very, very strong proposal for complete reparations for African Americans. And it's the actual phrase, the right to a meaningful endowment of resources at birth, added into the one that has then after that, and a secure retirement. So Darity's work is of course, very, very focused upon the issues of reparations. And so I feel that at least in the inclusion of those and also our full echoing of their work, we have a proposal for an economic Bill of Rights that would harmonize with the push for reparations.
Dr. Mack.
No, right now I'm just so overwhelmed. And gentlemen, I'm looking for where I can go and find this progressive Bill of Rights so that I could take a far more in-depth look at it. Because as I'm listening to you, clearly it has my utmost of attention. And so, Professor Kaye, one of the things that was ringing to mind as you were talking about what was happening with FDR is that whenever it appears that war hits, somewhere white America gets a consciousness about Black folk. When the American Revolution hit, I mean, there were times in the colonists where they talked about, let's not import any more slaves, let's everybody have freedom and dignity. Now I'm listening to you when World War I came, there's this consciousness about what was happening with Black folks. When 9/11 hit, all the patriotism, everybody's got flags going around, it's United of America. But once it appears we come out of these crises, that reversion back to white supremacy and the oppression of Black folks occurs again. And now it could just be my slanted look at things, but I'd certainly like to get your take on that as well as telling us where we can find this progressive Bill of Rights so that we can all take a far more in-depth look at it.
And we have some images, by the way, Dr. Kaye.
Well, I was going to say it is posted at Common Dreams, the website. You can find it there. I also want to point out that I'm not seeking to correct you, but fill out something rather important. In the wake of World War II, there was a serious effort on the part of, actually, in the Economic Bill of Rights, Proposal 44, the labor movement and what we came to call the civil rights movement both actively supported FDR's re-election because of this Economic Bill of Rights. And when he passed away in 1945, that commitment remained strong, especially in the CIO unions, the industrial unions. And also A. Philip Randolph himself continued to push by way of what we know of as the March on Washington movement, which actually originated in 1941. He was pushing for a whole host of initiatives, such as the desegregation of the military. And of all people, Harry Truman actually launched the very first Civil Rights Commission during his first few years in the White House. And they issued a pamphlet, which actually becomes in many ways a kind of place for the civil rights movement to begin a broader kind of action in favor of racial equality. Yeah. Now, if I could then, sorry, I didn't mean to go on too long, but I do want to point out as well that I left out a very key thing about this Economic Bill of Rights. And the reason I harp on this is that we really need to understand that this has been fundamental to the progressive tradition ever since the 1930s. And when I say progressive tradition, I mean in all its diversity. In 1968, not long before his assassination, Martin Luther King Jr. issued another call for an Economic Bill of Rights. And there is no question the inspiration for that came from FDR through A. Philip Randolph to Martin Luther King Jr. And later, here's another point. This Economic Bill of Rights was actually in the 1960 Democratic platform. So it's been there and it's been lost by the Democratic Party. And we feel it's imperative for progressives to not only fight to take hold of that past and advance it, but also, of course, to win seats and take hold of the Democratic Party.
I want to refine this now and turn our attention to Ukraine because we have to keep our eye on the urgency of the moment. Democracy itself is under attack. Help us to understand the inside-outside game from an economic perspective, because a lot of the Russian soldiers are shocked when they get into Ukraine and they realize, wait a minute, these people are not oppressed, but they're going there as workers themselves to fight against other people. Professor Kaye, would you tie that knot together?
Well, that's a tough knot to tie in some ways, but let me put it this way. We, for the past 45 years, and we know any number of decades before, but especially during this past 45 years, the democratic achievements of the 1960s for workers' rights, for African-American equality, for women's rights, came under siege starting in the 1970s. So what we've witnessed is 45 years of anti-democratic initiatives. In other words, a class war from above, which is, by the way, a class war from above against working people, again, in all their diversity. What we need to think about now is, can this Economic Bill of Rights provide a platform and a basis for progressive politics and also for the creation of a kind of, if you like, a united front of progressive forces, especially in the face of the crisis of democracy we currently face. And I think that when you think about, we know that the Russians have been lied to. There's no question. We know that we don't even know the full story regularly. But it is the case that what we need to appreciate is that the struggle for democracy, true democracy, is not only at stake in Eastern Europe, very much at stake, and those people are suffering and enduring punishing attacks. But it's also the case that the struggle for democracy is underway here, and progressives need to step forward with a vision rooted in American history that offers a really promising future.
I think I thank you, Professor Kaye. I think I like to, Brother Mac, I like to think of Professor Kaye as my Doc Brown, and I'm Marty something Blackfly. I don't know, but we always go back and forth on these issues. I want to bring Brother Minsky back into the conversation because I think I got it. I listened to Professor Kaye long enough. Help me to walk this through. I think if you have my signal, let me know. If not, I think what we're seeing, Brother Minsky, is the model that will be used here in the United States. Because if you think of Ukraine, we just did that interview. And our sister, the member of parliament who had to run into the basement, she looks like she is prosperous in her pre-invasion state. It looks like Ukraine was doing good before Putin got in there. I wonder what they're going to say when they get to Flint, Michigan, when they get to the burned out cities of the Rust Belt, when they get into some of these impoverished cities in the South, and then Putin and Xi Jinping decide to say, listen, there's a real crisis in America. What happens when they get a case study of what it is to be oppressed inside of a system in need of liberation?
Wow. By the way, I'm a huge fan of the show, and the absolute depth and complexity of the issues you're raising, again, are just proof and point. Wow, I always love the Ben Dixon Show. It's a phenomenal show, and I'm honored to be on it. But boy, man, there's a lot there to unpack. I definitely view, and by the way, PDA is a multi-issue organization, so of course I've been fully engaged in doing bunches of interviews and conversations with people on the Ukraine. And I mean, we're actually co-sponsoring an event on Sunday with Daniel Ellsberg and Bill Fletcher, member of the German Parliament, about this, an international event. But okay, we obviously have a struggle in the third decade and the last decade, by the middle of the decade of the 21st century, internationally, between the rise of these autocracies and the crisis of American democracy. And Donald Trump, whatever we make of his connections to Putin, I think he was building off a template that sort of Putin perfected of like establishing autocracy in the 21st century. You win an election and then you set about dismantling the democratic infrastructures of the society where you won the election to consolidate the personal gains of your power and to set up an autocracy. Of course, across the world, we have the Philippines, we have Brazil, we have India, we have Hungary. And then, of course, we have the fascist movements across Europe that are competing for democratic victories there. And this all fits in with the inability of neoliberal capitalism to in any way address this intense class structure that's emerged and consolidated. And of course, as for the long history of American structural racism, again, the prospects of economic gain in community after community after community are completely stalled. And yes, that makes many communities across the country, and you see this with the appeal of a kind of anti-democratic, proto-fascist politics in working class white communities across America. And then we also hear rumors, of course, and the statistics are and they're beyond anecdotal, but the idea that, you know, Trump made gains among Black male voters and Black Latino voters, and is that some of the pull again? That neoliberalism offers no way out, that, so kind of a doubling down on authoritarian nationalism does. That's a false promise, absolutely. And what we want to do, and the reason we've brought this forward now, is from our perspective, the big talking point for myself in interviews is that coming out of the 2016 election and through to the present, we now have three very pronounced, broad political movements inside a two-party system. We have the Trumpian racist reactionaries on the right. We have the neoliberal center running from the Romney wing of the Democratic Party through the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, and we have the progressives. And that the only of those three groups that promises to actually uplift the population in the ways that people want to see transformations in our economic system are the progressives. The other two groups will make claims to it. We know from the middle group, now 40 years of history, that there are no change in terms of the economic class structures in the United States. We're stagnated inside this incredible wealth inequality, lower social mobility. And then on the right, of course, it's a completely false bill of goods, right? You basically have it even going further than the moderates in terms of tax breaks for the wealthy, some adjustments around trade, nothing else whatsoever, and it offers no promise. Whereas the progressives actually offer a promise in terms of what? not a utopian fantasy, but basically adopting the policies outlined by Roosevelt, outlined by Philip Randolph, Martin Luther King Jr., and then also are in practice in basically all the other industrialized technological societies in the country where you don't have the, go ahead. Sorry, long answer to that.
And I, because you were listing the names and I don't want to miss the rest of the names. These are policies that I'm going to read off here. These are policies that are supported by Pastor William Barber. It's supported by Professor Cornel West. These are policies that are supported by Sister Nina Turner, who was on the show not too long ago, Cori Bush out of St. Louis, Chevron Jones down in Florida. Like there's a black political delegation who are in line with these. And I might, correctional Chevron Jones, I know he supports these, but I don't know if he's directly connected to this. I don't want to make that assertion. But I want to read these off with the 1 minute we have left. These are the Bill of Rights. This would address the issues that we see in the blight in the black community. It's hard landing this plane sometimes, but I need people to be able to see that what we're fighting for on the international level is the same thing we're fighting for on the domestic level, is the same thing we're fighting for on the local levels in our local communities, and that's the liberation of all people. Professor Kaye, if you would read to us out of the Common Dreams. You have the 8 points right there. The right to a useful job that pays a living wage. Would you just read those for us as we get ready to go to break?
Sure. The right to a useful job that pays a living wage and to a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining. 2, the right to comprehensive quality health care. 3, the right to a complete cost-free public education and access to broadband internet. 4, the right to decent, safe, affordable housing. 5, the right to a clean environment and a secure planet. 6, the right to a meaningful endowment of resources at birth and a secure retirement. 7, the right to sound banking and financial services. Finally, the right to recreation and participation in public life. And I will note for everyone's sake, since I saw Nina Turner on your show, Nina and I, well, I'm a fan of hers. I'm hoping she's a fan of mine. And Nina we consulted regularly with Nina as we constructed these.
Oh, wow. That is good to hear. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to get you back and we'll discuss these nuances a little bit more.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.